Many of us may be familiar with this painting. Who's seen this work before? Who's familiar with this work? So hands up if you've seen this painting before. Hands up if you've never seen this painting before. It's totally fine. Hands up if you've never seen this painting before. Okay, that's totally fine. So, I mean, it's, many of us are very familiar with the 16th century fresco titled The School of Athens. It's by Raphael, one of the most important Renaissance artists. The almost 8-meter long painting is shown in numerous textbooks, both in art and also in sciences. It represents some of history's most renowned scholars and scientists, philosophers and mathematicians in ancient Greece, including Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Archimedes, and Heraclitus. They are gathered as though they are sharing ideas and learning from each other. In the very center, 2 scholars stand out, Plato in red garb, pointing upwards, while his student Aristotle on the right is depicted holding a manuscript and holding out his arm with the palm of his hand pointing to the ground. But who's the figure on the left? It's none other than 12th century physician and judge Ibn Rushd, whom we will come across during the course of this presentation. Interestingly for us, 2 artists are believed to be represented in this mural, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, depicted here in the front with writing on a pedestal, although some people say it could be the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. Is Raphael, and this is an open question, is Raphael's deliberate ambiguity an attempt to equate artists with scientists in their importance? In my almost decade of researching, collecting, and lecturing on Middle Eastern art, I have often been asked if Islam forbids the depiction of human beings. This seems to be a common assumption. Although it is not explicitly prohibited in the Holy Quran, this belief seems to stem from the idea that the creation of living being is solely unique to God, and hence it has always been a contentious issue for some. However, a closer look at Arab, Middle Eastern, and Islamic art, whether in Iran, Egypt, or South Asia, proves that not only was the depiction of human form present, but that it was an essential tool for learning in the field of science. Yes, didn't fail me. Okay. For instance, we can see in this image a 15th century Ottoman surgeon and a physician, Sharafuddin Subunoglu, during an eye treatment, while instructions appear in Ottoman Turkish above and below the drawing. Not only is this work illustrative of a medical intervention, it also employs full human form and color rather than abstracted or diagrammatic elements. Further examples illustrate this. These 2 images depict a closer look at the anatomy of the eye. On the left, with Arabic text by physician Al-Mutadabbih, while 14th century Persian physician Mansur bin Ilyas illustrates what looks like a labeled spinal cord and the workings of the nervous system as part of his colored atlas of the human body. And this image is one of the most reproduced images in science in Islam. And really the point here is that a lot of people say, but Muslims don't depict figures. And this is something you hear even in modern art. But if you go back to the texts of even 1,000 words, that really proves them to be wrong. 13th century Aleppo, Syria, by then already home to some of them, to the famous citadel, a 12th century great mosque, as well as the home city of our host today, Dr. Iyad Rahman. Am I right? It's your hometown? See, I put that slide for you, Iyad. Also produced numerous scholars who utilized illustration not only to teach students about anatomy of the human body, in this case the eye, but also a detailed description of the tools necessary to perform surgeries, as shown here in these illustrations by 13th century scientist, basically Khalifa bin al-Muhassin. So how did Muslims excel in science? They excelled in science by doing illustrations. And so the whole idea of Muslims can depict figures is completely berserk for me whenever I hear it. And it comes up all the time. Finally, this rather colorful, and I would argue, one of the most attractive Ottoman illustrations for me, 2 doctors are seen giving instructions on the preparation of prescriptions. The physician seems to be engaged in giving the instructions to the chemist and are elevated and sat on a raised platform as though they are, you know how you have this king or it's like a throne that they're sat on. It gives them even more respect. The misconception that depiction of figures is prohibited in Islam was finally put to rest in the early 20th century. And this, ladies and gentlemen, and others, is one of the pivotal moments in Middle Eastern art. What you see on the screen now, what happened, the story I'm about to share for you. When Egyptian Prince Yusuf Kamal, top right, approached Sheikh Muhammad Abdu. Who was Sheikh Muhammad Abdu? He was the Grand Mufti. Do we all know what Grand Mufti is? The Mufti is the scholar that issues edicts. He's the scholar, he's sort of the grand religious scholar of Egypt. And every country has a Grand Mufti, but Egypt, because it's so important, the scholar or the Grand Scholar of Egypt edicts are seen as being crossing borders and going into other countries even. So this prince on the top right approaches the Grand Mufti, the highest Islamic scholar in Egypt, asks him to travel to Europe to visit museums and investigate the role of modern art in education and assess whether the depiction of human forms was permissible in Islam. So Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, of course, gets a free holiday to go to Europe, says yes, smart guy, travels across to Sicily and then on to mainland Italy, visits numerous institutions and museums, and issues a fatwa, which is a religious edict, in 1906, stating, called Images and Statues, the Benefits and Legality of Painting. In it, he proclaims that, so he says, yes, you can paint as long as you fulfill two conditions. So this is what puts an end to the idea of whether it is permissible or not. So listen to the two conditions. It is permitted so long as paintings are not a distraction from religious duties and that no blessing is sought from the image. These are the two conditions. Don't pray to the image and don't seek blessing from the image. If you fulfill these two conditions, you're good to go. Sheikh Muhammad even cites the work of the aforementioned Raphael, saying in his edict, it's fascinating how nations compete to acquire paintings, so much so that by one artist named Raphael, the work might be worth hundreds of thousands to some museums. This is in 1905, by the way. The significance of this edict went beyond Egypt and impacted other Islamic countries, which in turn formed artistic institutions of higher learning, such as the School of Art established by Kamal al-Mulk in Iran just 5 years later. So Iran, Iraq, Syria, all these countries established art schools after this edict was, oh God, what did he say to press? Do you remember? Yeah, I pressed the, by mistake, I pressed the screen. Do you remember what he said?
So when you, this is your mouse. When you take it to the right, here's here.
Okay, and then I can,
There, see?
and then I
and then you just click there.
I click there. Oh,
Okay, see?
okay. There we go. Okay, so the school of, so what happens after this event, after the fatwa? The School of Fine Arts of Cairo, being the first school of art ever in the Middle East, is inaugurated and established by Prince Yusuf Kamal, whom you saw in the previous slide in 1908. And it graduated the first generation of the country's modern artists, including figures like Raghib Ayad, Muhammad Nagi, and Mahmoud Mukhtar, who in their own turn went on to educate countless artists, both in Egypt and the wider generation. One of the most prominent figures was Mahmoud Mukhtar, who went on to study in the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1912. Upon his return, created perhaps what is Egypt's most recognizable modern monument, the Renaissance d'Egypte, Nahdat Masr in Arabic, deriving influence from ancient Egyptian sculptures and pharaonic forms. The artist attempts to create a distinct national visual language by drawing on a shared history to bring together diverse Egyptian populations. Egypt had Jews, Christians, Muslims. So to unite them, he decided to go back to the Pharaohic era. This is the idea, because it's like the Statue of Liberty that unites all of Americans, because they feel like it appeals to a higher calling rather than a contemporary cause. So another of the graduates, Muhammad Nagy, now we're going really back to science. Another of the graduates, Muhammad Nagy, the graduate of the School of Fine Arts, was a renowned diplomat. He was stationed in Brazil, in Greece, in France, and he was ambassador to Ethiopia. So he was a renowned diplomat and an influential cultural figure whose murals decorate major institutions in Egypt. Muhammad Nagy was amongst the first generation of artists that implemented his training at the Fine Arts Institute in Cairo, not only in the depiction of human form, but in the portrayal of specific individuals from modern and ancient Egyptian history. For instance, in this painting titled Arab Medicine from 1934, a lying figure seems to be ill, is being attended by a group of learned men. A character on the left places his hand on a book by the 10th century born polymath Ibn Sina, titled Al-Qanun. So this might actually be Ibn Sina, which advocates treating the whole body in a holistic fashion, diagnosing all the elements of the body from head to toe without the need to cut and dissect. The figure's left hand is pointing at the person reciting verses from the Quran in an attempt to link holistic medicine with Islamic practices. At the same time, modern medical and scientific equipment and tools are seen at the top and right corners. However, Muhammad Nagy's most famous mural, this is magnificent, by the way. I found this colored image last week. I didn't have a colored image until last week. However, Muhammad Nagy's most famous mural, perhaps, was the School of Alexandria. Remember the School of Athens? Was the School of Alexandria that can be seen here with more than one reference to Raphael's mural. The work was created a few years after Arab Medicine, 1938, I believe, and was a tribute to his home city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean, with a monumental size of 3 by 8 meters. By the way, the same size of the School of Athens. The mural depicts both Alexandrian natives as well as those that arrived from elsewhere in the region that have made significant contributions. Let's find out who's in this picture, okay? The conqueror, Alexander the Great, who founded the city in the 4th century BC, is shown atop a horse that is trampling a figure. Do you see Alexander the Great? Okay. While Saint Catherine, who is known for her beauty and fearlessness, is depicted in the center between two monumental figures, as though she is blessing the exchange of knowledge between them. So, by the way, that's the saint of Alexandria, Saint Catherine. And notice the exchange of knowledge is also a recreation of the School of Athens. On the right, bare-chested, we see Archimedes, a renowned Mediterranean scholar who had traveled to Alexandria in the 3rd century in order to study in Egypt, which had by then developed as a reputation as a center for great learning and scholarship. In a nod to the exchange of ideas depicted in the School of Athens, Archimedes seems to be handing over a manuscript to Averroes, known in Arabic as Ibn Rushd. We're going to come back to him. Averroes was an Andalusian philosopher and judge living in 12th century Andalusia, who contributed to the Islamization of Aristotle's rhetoric and who visited Alexandria, actually was chased out of Andalusia, and is portrayed here. This portrayal references the exchange of knowledge, not only between different geographies, Andalusia, Egypt, Southern Europe, but also across time and generations. Closer to the modern age, we see the artist Muhammad Nagy depicting contemporary classmate Mahmoud Mukhtar on the very left. You see Mahmoud Mukhtar? Does this work? So the artist who did the figure of the Renaissance of Egypt in the previous painting. Did I do anything wrong? Okay. He also shows Sheikh Muhammad Abdu. Oh, somebody's requesting. Please don't request. I don't know why. Don't request. Okay. Okay. So if you only know the trouble you put me through when you do that. So by the way, another interesting point is he depicts his contemporary, Mahmoud Mukhtar, but then he depicts Muhammad Abdu. Where is the religious scholar? There he is. The scholar who allowed him to study, the scholar who's the reason why he was allowed to study, is equated really with the greats, as though he is the equal of Alexander the Great and Saint Catherine. This is how monumental that scholar was. Okay, unfortunately, bad news, everybody. Unfortunately, this artwork is believed to have been destroyed in a fire during the 2011 Egyptian uprising against the rule of Mubarak, and its fate is currently unknown. Okay. Did it go to the next slide? No, it's because the other person made me press a button there. Okay, there we go. Okay. So, however, as significant as the School of Alexandria mural was, it was rather an elitist depiction of life in Egypt, showcasing scholars and artists who were close to the royal family. They were friends with the king. Mahmoud Mukhtar was friends with the king. Mahmoud Said was the uncle of the queen of Egypt. So it was a very elitist depiction. Things began to change considerably, however, in the second half of the 20th century with the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt. So, the establishment of a new socialist government that advocated for social and economic change. Artists then adopted a more egalitarian approach to painting, depicting different social classes and environments, as can be seen in Maryam Abdel Alim's Outpatient Clinic, which portrays a group of men and women waiting for their turn to be seen by a doctor. This painting was a direct nod to Gamal Abdel Nasser's rollout of social reforms that gave greater access to healthcare and education to rural Egyptians. They couldn't open clinics and schools fast enough. A further illustration of the link between Abdel Nasser's reform and science can be seen in Gazzar's The Charter, which was created when Nasser, the president of Egypt, proposed a new constitution for the Republic of Egypt in the early 60s. As you can see, a laborer and a farmer are kneeling as if they're in prayer in front of a female figure representing Egypt, while a satellite dish appears on the right, and what looks like a complex astronomical device is seen on the lower left. So Gamal Abdel Nasser really is equating science with the rebirth of Egypt as a nation. This is one of my favorite paintings, and no one has ever seen it. The empowerment of women was an important theme for Gamal Abdel Nasser, as well as seen in this painting by Zainab al-Sigini. She's in her 90s, by the way, titled What the Revolution Has Achieved in 10 Years. 4 characters are depicted, including a shipbuilder, a laborer or lumberjack, and a female agricultural worker. Sat on a pile of books appears to be a woman holding an atom with revolving electrons in her hand. Perhaps it is a reference to the first Egyptian female nuclear physicist, Samira Musa, who nobody has heard of, by the way, who held a doctorate in atomic radiation in the 1940s. Can you imagine? And who sadly died in, I should say, suspicious circumstances in an accident in 1952. Throughout her career as a scientist, Samira Musa strived to achieve the peaceful use of atomic energy. Very few people in the Middle East know about this woman. But this is one of my favorite paintings. Okay. The building of the Aswan Dam. So listen, Gamal Abdel Nasser had a huge ego. He had huge ambitions, but he had a huge ego as well. He wanted to construct this massive dam in Egypt that cost a lot of people, cost a lot of money. It actually caused Egypt to pivot away from the Western camp to the Soviet camp. It was a massive, and they commissioned more than 24 artists to go to the Aswan Dam area to paint the Aswan Dam. By the way, Aswan Dam is 800 kilometers south of Cairo. So the building of the Aswan Dam was a major theme for many of the region's artists. It was positioned not only as a feat of modern engineering, but also as a project of national pride for Egypt. Here we see a futuristic depiction by Abdelhadi al-Gazzar, who personifies the High Dam and likens the technologically advanced construction project to a larger-than-life science man. This painting has 2 names, High Dam and Science Man. Also bad news, the painting has been lost for decades. No one has seen it. This is a picture we have from the 80s. Contrasting Raghib Ayad on the right, showing you rudimentary use of equipment. Even during, this is one of the most famous paintings from the Middle East, by the way. Even during the time of war, science played a major role in the attempt of artists to boost the morale of the populations that felt defeated and overcome. In the case of Hamid Uwais's Protector of Life, Gardien de la Vie, painted here following the defeat of the Egyptian military in the 1967 war with Israel. This work shows a powerful central figure holding a machine gun and guarding the population of Egypt, including what appears to be a scientist in the background working in a laboratory. This reflects the importance that science was afforded in rebuilding the nation's dignity and strength. Around the same time of Nasser's social reforms, okay, let's go and click on this. Okay, around the same time of Nasser's social reforms in the 1950s, a group of artists in Baghdad issued a document that advocated for a spirit of innovation and creative renewal, in which they called upon artists to derive inspiration from local heritage, as well as the civilizations of the contemporary age, specifically naming a 13th century artist, Yahya al-Wasiti, whose illustrations often included scientific themes. I'll show you some of Wasiti's work. For instance, in al-Wasiti's Maqamat, okay, yes, illustrations, we see an assembly of individuals gathered around a senior scholar, possibly learning about the preparation of tinctures and chemical compounds. So this school of art, folks, is calling on Iraqis to look back in history and say, be proud of your history. Look at what's been depicted in the past 1,000 years. This is, I think, in the Library of Congress, by the way. The impact of that school, the Baghdad School of Modern Art, went beyond Iraq's borders, and their call on artists to draw inspiration from heritage can be seen in Syrian artist Abdul Latif al-Samoudi's collage that depicts a number of scientific scenes, including the human anatomy by Mansour bin Ilyas, as seen earlier. Remember the work I showed it to you earlier? So you're looking at contemporary artists who are drawing inspiration using ancient Islamic depictions of the human body in contemporary art in the 20th century. So also from Syria, in a further nod to Raphael's School of Athens, we see an attempt by artist Mahmoud Hammad to portray 16 of the most renowned scientists. This is one of my favorite works. 16 of the most renowned scientists of the Islamic world. This 1988 painting is currently on display at the Sharjah Museum of Islamic Civilizations, my hometown. And in the next slides, folks, we're going to zoom into each one very briefly and tell you who is depicted in this painting. Okay, so echoing the 15th century painting by Raphael, Hammad includes a depiction of polymath Averroes. Averroes. Is that how you say it? Averroes? How do you say him? Averroes? Ibn Rushd. This is how you say his name in Arabic. So the depiction of polymath Averroes or Ibn Rushd, who wrote more than 20 books on medicine. However, unlike Raphael, who shows the figure towards the side and in the background, here Ibn Rushd is given a prominent spot, front and center. So when Middle Eastern artists depict Middle Eastern figures, they put them in the front. They don't put them on the sidelines. And by the way, this also applies to women artists. When women depict women, they don't put them on the sidelines like men do. They put them in the front, which is why this is so interesting for me. Okay, so Averroes or Ibn Rushd is celebrated as a prolific expert that contributed to scholarship on many subjects, including philosophy, theology, medicine, astronomy, physics, psychology, mathematics, Islamic jurisprudence, and linguistics. Okay, we also see Al-Farabi on the left. He was a renowned scientist and philosopher of the Islamic Golden Age, as well as a cosmologist, a logician, a logician and musician. On the right is the famous Persian polymath, Avicenna or Ibn Sina, who showed up in an earlier painting, who wrote 440 works on a wide range of subjects. His most famous books were the Book of Healing and the Canon of Medicine. How can you write a book on the Book of Healing without depicting human form? So this is something that is very, very important. Shown on this slide are Jabr ibn Hayyan or Gebr, considered the father of alchemy, as well as Al-Razi or Razes, a Persian physician, philosopher, and chemist. Mahmud Hammad did not leave out Ibn Khaldun. Many of you know him. A historiographer, best known for his book Al-Muqaddimah, known as the Prolegomena in Greek. He also included the Kurdish historian and geographer Abu al-Fida Ismail al-Hamwi, a Syrian scholar and Sufi mystic Ibn Asakir. Shown in the painting are also cartographer and Egyptologist Al-Idrisi or Idrisis, who created the most accurate map of the world in pre-modern times, and Ibn al-Nafis, who was the first to describe the pulmonary circulation of blood. We also have the father of Islamic and Arabic philosophy, Al-Kindi, Al-Tusi, who created accurate tables of planetary motions, and Al-Biruni, who devised a formula to measure the Earth's radius. By the way, every one of them here has a crater on the moon named after them. So Biruni, there's a massive crater named after him on the moon's surface. So these are huge figures, even in the 21st century, that we should know about. Finally, we have the astronomers Al-Mawrudi and Ibn Yunus, as well as the Andalusian polymath Abbas ibn Firnas, who is reported to have experimented with a form of light. Okay, here is another zoomed out look at Mahmud Hammad's Muslim scientist, just for you folks to have a look at it now that we've zoomed out. Okay, now what's the problem with that painting for me? It's a gorgeous painting. The problem is that even though it depicts various ethnic groups residing in the Islamic world, including Arab, Persian, Kurdish, and others, the painting is lacking in the representation of women, such as educator Fatima al-Fihri or mathematician Sutaita al-Mahmali. In fact, the role of women in scholarship and learning was already depicted in 16th century illustrations, such as this one from Shiraz in Iran. Okay? Speaking of Iran, in the mid-20th century, we saw a revival of artistic movements, such as the Saqqahani, the school that drew inspiration from Persian calligraphy, Shia shrines, and local symbols and motifs. For instance, this hand by Hussein Zandarudi includes references of talismanic as well as spiritual motifs, including the hand of Fatima, meant to ward off evil eye, coupled with contemporary techniques, such as the use of the collage, abstraction, and simplification. When this painting went on a tour of America in 1962, American scholars who were a bit snobbish when it came to Middle Eastern art said, how is this art Middle Eastern? So Akbar Tajvidi, who was the curator of that exhibition, responded, how can you be so surprised? We too are living in the century of machinery, speed, and the atom. Our feelings and emotions cannot be unrelated to the time in which we live. Moving on to Turkey very briefly, artists such as Fakhr Nisa Zaid work the break of the atom and vegetal life is a monumental painting measuring 5.5 meters, combining geometric abstraction and rhythmic repetition of forms, and definitely inspired by a kaleidoscope of swarming forms that she has learned from both Oriental mysticism as well as calligraphy, Islamic and Arabic calligraphy. Heading south to Iraq, we see Mahmoud Sabri, whose work was all about figuration, by the way, abandoning figuration, and moving by the late 60s and early 70s into an investigation of abstract form through the application of scientific methods in art. He comes up with this term called quantum realism in 1971 and publishes a manifesto about it. He relies on the atomic structure of different elements to inform a visual representation. Here, for instance, we see a depiction of water. This is, for you, water could be a chemical compound represented by H2O, but here for him, it's represented by color. And next, we see the importance role that women artists, is it moving? Oh, I love this. Okay, so we see color and light also playing an important role in the work of this female artist, Nadia Sayali, who is a pioneer in light installation, who explores the forms and dimensions of planet Earth through this moving light sculpture. This is one of the most important artists. Her work is at the Tate, at the MoMA, at the Met Museum on permanent display. Salwa Rawda Shaqair died at the age of 101 years ago. She was a Lebanese abstract artist and a pioneer who is said to have held the region's, the Middle East, first abstract art exhibition. But her work is very much influenced by Islamic, even though she wasn't Muslim, by Islamic scientific and mathematical concepts, as well as the laws of physics and mechanics. These are carefully constructed sculptures in which she uses experimental approach with modular forms, with lines and curves, drawing inspiration from Islamic design and that are held together with principles of physics. One of the most sought after sculptures of contemporary art is this one. When you look at it, of course, you can imagine the Kaaba in Mecca, right? It is a work by Saudi artist Ahmad Matar, which fuses art, science, and the concept of identity and religion. In this work called Magnetism, Ahmad Matar drops a cuboid of magnet that resembles the Kaaba in Mecca into a platform where you have thousands of iron particles that are repelled by the magnet and kept in constant tension. And by the way, this is an investigation into our relationship with religion. There's a constant tension between us and our faith and our beliefs. Another Saudi artist also inspired by faith is Sultan Al-Hamoud, who uses geometric compositions in this work with Islamic symmetry as well. This is a Berlin-based artist, Timo Nasri, one of my favorites, who uses geometric ornaments and draws inspiration from Islamic architecture by trying to explore infinite space. And the cosmos, obviously. Cosmos plays an important role here. Going back to Ahmad Matar, by the way, the same person who did Magnetism, who, by the way, started his career as a medical doctor. He often blends the past, represented with Islamic traditional arts, with the present. So this looks like an Islamic manuscript, but in fact is a modern X-ray, because he was a doctor. And he tries to blend Islamic art with innovations in modern medicine. But he also brings together two subjects that are often at odds: faith and science. This is also a very popular work, folks. We often see the technique of X-rays that you saw in the previous work to issue a warning, so to speak, that the environmental and social risks of oil are so vast that they threaten to overthrow human evolution into a spiral of destruction. Fantastic artwork. I'll leave it on the screen for a minute for you to see. Okay. This is a work actually that's on display today here at Galerie Nord in Berlin, depicting the Buraq, which is based on an Islamic story in which the Prophet ascended to the heavens from Mecca to Jerusalem. And it's a work by Saeed Baalbaki, a Lebanese artist based in Berlin. And this work questions the authority of the museum as an institution and the ways in which histories are written and presented. Basically, Saeed Baalbaki says, every time I go to a museum, everything is presented as though it's a fact. And so I want to investigate whether that's true or not. Okay, so now I'm going to whiz through these because we have 5 minutes to go. Space exploration played an important role in Middle Eastern art, and even in actual scientific experiments like the Lebanese Rocket Society of the early 1960s. I'll keep it online just for you to take a picture. Okay. But artists always imagined what people in space would look like. So you have a Kuwaiti artist and an Egyptian artist both imagining what space would look like. Here you see an Egyptian artist exploring themes of abstraction and geometry, but drawing inspiration from the cosmos. Another artist, Ito Barada, names the crates that are named after Islamic scientists in this artwork, one by one. I can go back to this later. One of my favorites, and the penultimate slide here, is the theme. It's a scientific theme or a mathematical theme of infinity, but it is not an infinity of science, it's an infinity of conflict, endless conflict that the Middle East has been subject to. And we can talk about this work for half an hour, by the way. It's one of my favorite works to present to the students. I'm going to stop here and I'll say that Throughout the modern age, science has provided ample inspiration to artists as well as poets, writers, musicians, who in many cases drew from their own local heritage, as well as Babylonian, Pharaonic, Islamic heritage, while adopting 20th century techniques in order to express new identities. Why am I interested in the 20th century? New countries are being born. Freedom movements, emancipation movements were all a product of this modern era. Of course, this presentation is merely a brief introduction into the myriad of artworks that have been created in the past century and the interconnection between art and science, which is a topic that merits further exploration and research.